Okay. So, Earl, the one D&D game I'm in just ended its first like main kind of arc, this big thing in one of the main cities, and it's going on hiatus for a little bit. But I'm gonna go over the final encounter that we had in that and kind of use it as an example of how to build encounters. Some, I guess, pitfalls, mistakes that were made, something like that. I don't like explicitly saying mistakes that were made. I don't like that language, but I can't think of anything different. So, so let's set the stage. I'm not worried about narrative bullshit. So it happens in this big ballroom. It's like 100 feet by 100 feet. It's a big area. Most of us are kind of in the center. And towards the back of the room, there are two NPC allies, or NPC ally combatants that we have with us. A barbarian and a fighter. And then there's some kind of like non-combatant NPCs that are just going to get fucked up. But we don't really care about those. Then, all around the room, there are 6 henchmen that appear, and there's a 7th, like, main enemy who's like the real boss. He is my character's nemesis type thingy. He's a big lizard guy. Hit the curve a little bit. So, the henchmen, let's start off. Henchmen, they have like 3 attacks, 2 scimitar strikes, and a dagger. They have a parrying reaction against melee attack. And that's kind of it. I think they also have like poison blowguns, but they just use one to down one of the helpless NPCs right away. I guess just to get rid of him narratively, which is fine. Then, the main enemy, he's got well over 100 HP. He's got like relatively low AC of like 16 or 17. I feel like his AC could have been 1 or 2 higher. It would have made sense. Then, he's got longsword attacks. And he gets the Skewer ability from the Lizard King enemy, where they can do an extra 3d6 damage, and they steal life, or I think it's technically written as you gain temporary hit points equal to fucking whatever. You get health, which fits into this enemy narratively. He's always coming back from the dead and doing all this regeneration and bullshit. So. That kind of makes a lot of sense narratively. The DM ended up forgetting about that Skewer ability like twice. That's how it is. I'll say right off the bat, combats and remembering stuff in combats are this DM's weakest area. And that's fine. Like, again, any DM is going to have, not even any DM, any person is going to have weak areas no matter what. Like, it's just how it is. So just gotta work around it, but that's a topic for a separate video. So he's got these abilities, and then the DM ended up using legendary actions, more like mythic actions. He essentially only used like 3 of them this whole fight. The first time he just recovered like a good chunk of health as a legendary action. The second time he made like a special disengage. But again, the DM didn't factor in, or not again, but for that, the player didn't factor in specific player abilities. Like the barbarian that was in close range with this boss has the sentinel feat. So getting a free disengage didn't matter. And that barbarian already made an attack of opportunity that round, so the boss's speed was 0. So, rules as written, they're not allowed to do this. But the DM ruled it, and which I think was a good call. The boss still moved, but only half their movement speed, so that it was still, so that player's abilities still was effective, but it wasn't just like shutting down the entire encounter. So he moved out, and then he was going to use another legendary ability to just recover to full health, which I think is kind of boring. There's other ways that could have been formulated to have a similar kind of ability to keep the fight going. But like once all the henchmen were dead, that character, I think it was also a legendary action. He raised up all the henchmen as ghouls, so he had to fight them again, which I kind of felt like that should have happened as the henchmen went down. Like on that henchman's next turn, they would raise up as a ghoul. That would have been more interesting, and it would have like built the tension slower. It would have built the tension more naturally, instead of like, okay, so we would have had to deal with them like bit by bit and realize like, okay, we have to fight these guys one on like, even if we kill them, they're still not eliminated. But so these legendary actions were actually a little bit more like mythic actions. Like when certain conditions were met, the boss did a thing. So I think for this design, for this character, Gix, this antagonistic lizard folk, he's got lots of regeneration, lots of ways to steal health, and he's a vicious combatant. So I think giving him more ways to make extra weapon attacks, more ways to steal life, maybe giving him an Eldritch Blast, especially a special Eldritch Blast reaction to getting shot by the rogue that's in our party. That would have helped. Because, like, the more attacks you give an enemy like this, the more threatening they become. Because they can make all these extra attacks per round. And if you attach some sort of condition to them, then the players can possibly play around them. Like, if this boss gets to make a special reaction, if he gets hit with a ranged attack, he can just do an Eldritch Blast at whoever shot him. Well, now that PC is encouraged to either, like, get behind cover and make ranged attacks, or come in close range and fight in melee. If that character's capable of that. Then, that big heal legendary action, I feel, is less interesting, especially if you give this enemy, more sources of regeneration, and especially more attacks to be able to steal life with. That would be, like, he would get a lot of that recovery, but it would be spread out, and it would be gradual. Instead of just, oh, he's dead, oh, he's not! Yeah, especially because I talked to the DM about some of the narrative stuff for this guy, and as he's regenerating, because he's quote my enemy. So one of the things about like lizard kings and stuff is that they tend to grow extra arms. I believe I might be making that up, but regardless, that would have been a cool thing for this guy to do. Like after the first time he takes damage, like maybe when he makes another attack. And he recovers life after he's lost life. We'll just say the first time he recovers life, he grows an extra arm. And that extra arm can make an extra attack. Like, maybe for every extra arm he has an extra reaction that he can use to make melee attacks or something. So he can just make all these extra attacks. And all these attacks carry the regeneration properties, the lifesteal properties. So he's hemorrhaging life, he's constantly getting hit, but he's also just recovering all this life. Could be stuff like that. And this guy's just cutting me off, that's nice. So, and then instead of his like final, which it wasn't a legendary action, it's like closer to a mythic action, and I'm just going to call it a mythic action. Instead of him just recovering all his life, could have had something like, all right, depending on how many ghouls he has left under his command, he kills them all simultaneously, and for everyone he kills, he gets extra AC and extra damage or something, as like, you know, like a bunch of these souls swirl around his sword and something like that. Like he draws all these souls into his sword and he gets extra bonuses to attack and some extra AC and bonuses to saving throws. Something like that. That could be cool. Instead of just he gets a bunch of extra health. The other like main issue with this encounter is the fact that there were 2 NPC helpers in the fight. It made it harder for us, or it made it much easier for us to deal with these henchmen. Because we could more or less kill them in one shot, or in one turn if everything went well. If we rolled just average damage but all our attacks hit, we could more or less kill one of these guys in one turn. But because we had these 2 NPC helpers with us, it wasn't as threatening. And I feel like in general, I don't like NPC allies. If you've got a party of like 4 or 5, they're unnecessary. And they clog up initiative, and they weaken your encounters. So overall, I would veer away from using them. But I think personally for that particular campaign, they're set up in a good way that they're usable as like extra guards for stuff. But that, again, separate video, separate topic. So, Denny's is all boarded up. That's sad. That sads me. So that's kind of the only real like 2 issues with with that encounter, because if they gradually recover life, you really understand what's going on. Whereas if they just heal as mythic actions or legendary actions, it's sort of more boring, because it's the Pokemon effect where you're fighting another trainer and they just pull out a full restore. You feel cheated. It doesn't feel particularly good. It's just like, okay, it just resets everything instead of like a more gradual understanding where like you feel the fight slipping away from you. It's really just like that, and the NPC helpers. But I say all this with the benefit of already having played the encounter, so I know how it felt, and I can change it. I can adjust it. I can modify it like retroactively, knowing what didn't work. So. But also, I feel like that's generally one of my strengths, or that, because I haven't technically DM'd yet, but as a DM, that will be one of my strengths, making like cool monsters and cool encounters. Just going over an encounter and thinking about ways to improve it and ways you can twist it.